They tried to take a black man's home with $250,000 in fines. What they didn't know, he owned the land under every single house in their neighborhood, and when the truth came out, it flipped everything upside down. But here's the part nobody saw coming. What happened next wasn't just about money. It was about history, about power, and about exposing a system built to control people who were never meant to have control. This is more than just a story about an HOA gone too far. This is about a fight that feels bigger than one neighborhood. HOAs have a reputation. Some people defend them, saying they keep neighborhoods clean and protect property values. But others, they see HOAs as little more than mini governments that fine people for having the wrong type of mailbox or for leaving their trash cans out too long. But what happens when an HOA bites off more than it can chew? What happens when the person they go after isn't powerless, but actually has more authority than all of them combined? Today, we're diving into the story of a man the HOA thought they could crush, but instead, he crushed their entire power structure. Homeowners associations are supposed to help communities. That's what the paperwork says. They manage shared spaces, keep houses looking uniform, and enforce community standards. But there's a darker side to the setup. HOAs are often run by people with too much time on their hands and a taste for control. They issue fines for grass that's an inch too tall. They threaten people over holiday decorations. They demand changes to paint colors, fences, even cars parked in driveways. Now imagine that control, but on steroids. Imagine being fined not $100, not even $1,000, but $250,000. That's not just a fine. That's a life-ruining number. That's a number that could force someone to sell their house, declare bankruptcy, or lose everything they've worked for. And that's exactly what this HOA tried to do. But the real problem wasn't just the money. The problem was the arrogance. The HOA assumed they could steamroll someone they thought had no power. They assumed this man would fold, but they couldn't have been more wrong. Let's paint the picture. Texas, a black man with land. This wasn't just a cookie-cutter house in the suburbs. This was land he actually owned. Land that went back generations. Land that, whether they knew it or not, formed the foundation of the entire neighborhood. The HOA saw him as just another homeowner. To them, he was just another name they could control. So when they started sending notices about violations, he didn't take them seriously at first. Who would? Some of the violations were petty. Things like how his property line looked, how he used his lot, and claims that his land didn't fit their community guidelines. But this wasn't just about property rules. Ask yourself this. Why go so hard so fast? Why fine someone $250,000 for issues that were never that big to begin with? There's an uncomfortable truth here. In America, black landowners have always faced extra pressure. From the moment slavery ended, systems were built to keep black families from holding onto property. Land was stolen, deeds were forged, taxes were inflated. And in neighborhoods with HOAs, you have to wonder, was this about rules or was this about race? Do you think the HOA went too far here? Drop your thoughts below because this part matters. So while the HOA was busy racking up fines, this man wasn't panicking. He knew something they didn't, because the HOA believed they were dealing with just another homeowner. But in reality, he was the one who held the master deed to the entire neighborhood. Every single house in that subdivision was sitting on his land. The HOA could try to enforce fines, but in the eyes of the law, he was the landlord of all of them. Imagine their faces when that came out. And if you think that was wild, wait until you hear what happened when the case hit court. Stick around, you're not going to want to miss that. Let's go deeper into why this was such a big deal. The HOA had been throwing their weight around, threatening foreclosure if he didn't pay the fines. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had him backed into a corner. But once ownership records were pulled, their entire argument fell apart. Because here's the thing, HOAs don't own the land. They govern through agreements, covenants, and contracts signed by homeowners. But the actual land ownership, that's separate. And in this case, the entire neighborhood had been built on land he or his family still legally owned. The developers who built those houses, they never properly bought the land, they leased it. And those leases, they were still tied to him. So when the HOA tried to flex their power, they exposed the fact that they didn't really have any. They were enforcing rules on top of land they didn't control. It's like trying to boss someone around in their own living room. Once that truth came out, it wasn't just embarrassing. It destroyed their credibility. But here, where things get crazy, you'd think once the truth came out, the HOA would back down. You'd think they'd realize they'd messed with the wrong person. But that's not what happened. Instead, they doubled down. They tried to fight the ownership claim. They tried to argue he didn't have the rights he clearly had. And when that didn't work, they tried to twist the law in their favor. And the question is, why? Why keep fighting when the evidence is so clear? Was it pride? Was it desperation? Or was it something deeper, like not being able to handle the fact that a black man held that much power over them? Now let's talk about what went down in court. When the HOA finally took things to court to enforce the $250,000 fine, everything came to a head. In front of a judge, both sides had to lay their cards on the table. The HOA came in confident, thinking their stack of fines and violations would win. But then came the ownership records. One by one, documents were presented showing that the land beneath every house, every yard, and every street was tied back to him. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a clerical error. It was the truth. And in that courtroom, you could feel the air shift. The judge knew it. The HOA board members knew it. Even the neighbors sitting in the back knew it. The man they'd tried to bury under debt was actually the one holding the most valuable asset of all. And just like that, the $250,000 fine turned into a joke. How do you find the person who owns the ground under your home? How do you threaten foreclosure on someone who technically could evict you? The entire situation flipped. The predator became the prey. The HOA realized they weren't fighting a powerless homeowner. They were fighting their landlord. Now picture that. Picture being on the HOA board, smug in your power, only to have it revealed that you're nothing more than a tenant on the land you thought you controlled. That's not just losing a case. That's being humiliated in front of everyone. But here's the important part. This didn't just end with one man winning in court. This opened the door for bigger conversations. People started asking, how many HOAs are abusing their power right now? How many homeowners are too scared to fight back? And how many stories like this are out there, waiting for the truth to come out? Because the sad truth is, most people don't have the resources to push back. They get bullied into paying fines. They lose their homes. They stay quiet because fighting back feels impossible. This man's case was different because he had the ultimate trump card, ownership. But for every story like his, there are hundreds where people lose everything to a system that was never designed to protect them in the first place. And if you think HOAs are just annoying, think again. They have the power to put liens on your home, to drag you into court, to ruin your credit. And in some states, they can foreclose on you without a mortgage lender even being involved. That's how much unchecked power they've been given. So when this man stood up and won, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a symbol of what happens when the tables turn. At the end of the day, this story isn't just about a fine. It's about history. It's about a black man who refused to be crushed by a system that's crushed so many before him. And it's about how the truth, once it comes out, can flip the entire balance of power. The HOA thought they could bury him in fines. Instead, they exposed themselves as powerless. And in that moment, the man they underestimated became the one holding all the cards. This is why stories like this matter, because they remind us that power isn't always where it looks like it is. Sometimes, the people we think are vulnerable are the ones with the most strength of all. So the next time you hear about an HOA throwing its weight around, remember this case. Remember how fast their authority crumbled when real ownership stepped in. And remember that control only works when people believe in it. The moment that belief cracks, the whole system falls apart. When the courtroom battle ended and the truth came out, you'd think the HOA would have learned their lesson. But power doesn't let go so easily. Pride doesn't just disappear overnight. What came next was almost more shocking than the $250,000 fine itself, because instead of bowing their heads in shame, the HOA tried to rewrite the story. Neighbors began whispering. Some didn't know what to believe. Could it really be true that the man they had seen as just another homeowner actually owned the entire neighborhood? The idea rattled people. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It was about identity, about who held the real power where they lived. The HOA board members scrambled. Behind closed doors, they held emergency meetings. They tried to find legal loopholes. They even started sending letters to homeowners, claiming the court decision didn't mean what it clearly meant. They said the man's ownership didn't invalidate their rules. But here's the truth. It absolutely did. And the man, he stayed calm. He wasn't running around waving his victory in people's faces. He didn't have to. The documents spoke louder than any words ever could. He just kept living his life while the HOA scrambled to salvage theirs. Now let's talk about the people in the neighborhood. Imagine living there, paying your dues to an HOA every month, believing they had authority, only to learn that the land under your house belongs to the very man they tried to destroy. Some people were angry. They felt tricked. Others felt embarrassed. And then there were those who felt something deeper, shame, because some of them had cheered on the HOA when the fines started rolling in. They'd assumed he was just being difficult. They assumed the HOA was right. This is where things got messy. Some neighbors started reaching out privately, apologizing. Others doubled down, clinging to the HOA like it was their lifeline. And the question became, would the neighborhood ever truly recover from this? Or was this the beginning of a new kind of power struggle? When an institution loses credibility, it doesn't go quietly. The HOA began threatening homeowners with higher dues, warning that without their leadership, the neighborhood would fall apart. They painted themselves as heroes protecting property values, even as the truth hung over their heads like a storm cloud. But every attempt they made only highlighted their weakness. Because everyone knew, no matter what they said, they couldn't control the man who owned the land. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear about what they tried next. They attempted to sue again, this time with a different strategy. They argued that even though he owned the land, the HOA's covenants and restrictions still applied. It was like trying to argue gravity didn't exist because you didn't like falling. The judge wasn't having it. Once again, the HOA was slapped down. This is where we need to step back and look at the bigger picture. Why did this hit so hard? Because in America, land is more than dirt. Land is legacy. Land is power. And for black families, owning and keeping land has always been a fight. From the moment freedom was granted after slavery, land ownership became the battlefield. Some families managed to hold onto land, passing it down through generations despite constant attempts to strip it away. That's what makes this story so powerful. It's not just about a man beating an HOA. It's about history catching up with the present. It's about the resilience of a family who held on to land long enough to one day face down an entire institution with it. And it's about reminding us that even when systems are stacked against people, sometimes, just sometimes, the truth wins out. Word spread fast. Local media caught wind of the story and suddenly cameras were on the neighborhood. Reporters asked questions the HOA didn't want to answer. How could you find the man who owns your land? Why did you push for $250,000 in penalties? Was this about rules, or was it about race? The HOA squirmed under the spotlight. They tried to spin it, claiming they were just following guidelines. But the public wasn't buying it. The optics were too clear. A black man targeted, fined into oblivion, only to reveal he held the ultimate trump card. The story became bigger than the neighborhood. It became a symbol. And when stories like this hit the news, They live on, they spread, and they start conversations people can't ignore. The fallout didn't just end with embarrassment. Homeowners started questioning why they were paying dues to an HOA that had no real authority. Attendance at meetings dropped, respect for the board collapsed, and eventually, some people began asking the ultimate question: should the HOA even exist anymore? Think about that. An organization built on control, now stripped of its credibility. That's the kind of collapse that starts slow and then happens all at once. And the man at the center of it, he didn't have to lift a finger. All he had to do was keep standing on the truth. What happened in this neighborhood should be a warning to HOAs everywhere. Abuse power long enough, and eventually you'll push the wrong person too far. And when that happens, the fallout can shake everything. Because HOAs rely on fear. They rely on homeowners believing they have no choice but to comply. But the second that illusion is broken, their authority starts crumbling. This case wasn't just about one man winning. It was about showing the cracks in the system. It was about exposing the arrogance of organizations that believe they're untouchable. And it was about reminding people that ownership is the one thing no HOA can fake. Part 1 of this story showed us how a man turned the tables on his HOA. Part 2 shows us the ripple effect, the fallout, the humiliation, the cracks spreading through the system. Together, these two parts form a picture bigger than any single neighborhood. They show us what happens when truth collides with arrogance, when history collides with prejudice, and when power is revealed for what it really is: fragile. And if you think this is the end of the story, think again, because the struggle between homeowners and HOAs is far from over. This was one battle won, but the war over land, power, and control, that's still being fought every single day in neighborhoods across America. Subscribe if you want more stories that expose the truth.